You should not waste food on trash like him. Vivian's voice cut through the quiet evening air like a blade, sharp and cold. Nora's hands froze on the wooden bowl she had been filling with stew, the steam rising between her fingers as she turned to face the beta's daughter. Vivian stood in the doorway of the tavern, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the last rays of sunlight, her expensive silk dress a stark contrast to Nora's simple cotton apron stained with grease and flour. "He is hungry," Nora said quietly, her voice steady, despite the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "I have enough to share." Vivian laughed, the sound empty and brittle. "You have enough? You can barely afford to feed yourself, and yet you give your meals to every filthy vagrant who wanders past this pathetic excuse for an establishment." She stepped closer, her amber eyes glinting with disdain. "But I suppose it makes sense. Trash recognizes trash. An omega without a wolf, feeding. Beggars without homes. How perfectly fitting." The words stung, as they always did, but Nora had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged Vivian's cruelty. She turned back to the bowl, ladling thick chunks of meat and vegetables into it with careful precision. "Kindness does not cost anything," she murmured, more to herself than to Vivian. "Oh, but it does," Vivian replied, her heels clicking against the wooden floor as she circled Nora like a predator assessing prey. "It costs you respect. It costs you dignity. Every time you debase yourself by serving these worthless creatures, you remind everyone in this pack exactly what you are. Nothing." Nora did not respond. She had learned that silence was often the best defense against Vivian's attacks. She picked up the bowl, now filled to the brim, and grabbed a hunk of fresh bread from the basket on the counter. The man waiting outside had looked so tired, his clothes torn and mud-caked, his face hidden beneath layers of grime and an overgrown beard. When he had approached the back door of the tavern, most people had shooed him away with disgust. But Nora had seen something in his eyes, something that spoke of deep exhaustion and perhaps even deeper pain. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed as worthless. She would not do that to another person, no matter how lowly their circumstances appeared. "You are pathetic," Vivian said, as Nora moved toward the door. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" Nora paused, her hand on the doorknob. Of course she knew. The entire pack had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. Tomorrow, the Alpha King himself, Darius Blackthorn, would arrive at the Crescent Moon Pack for the Grand Unity Ritual. It was an unprecedented honor, and everyone was speculating about why the king would choose their relatively small pack for such an important event. Rumor had it that he was searching for potential candidates to present as his queen, and every unmated she-wolf of age was desperate to catch his attention. "Tomorrow, the Alpha King arrives," Vivian continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "And tomorrow, I will be presented to him as the most eligible she-wolf in this pack. My father has already arranged everything. By the end of the week, I will likely be leaving for the royal court." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And you will still be here, feeding beggars and scrubbing floors, exactly where you belong." Nora opened the door and stepped into the cool evening air without responding. The man was sitting on the ground near the back wall of the tavern, his back against the weathered wood, his head bowed in exhaustion. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the ground was still muddy, and his clothes were soaked through. He looked up as she approached, and even through the dirt and shadows, she could see the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were unusual, a deep golden amber that seemed to glow in the fading light. For a moment, something flickered in her chest, a strange warmth that she could not quite identify, but she pushed it aside. She did not have a wolf. She had never experienced the sensation that other wolves described when they talked about recognition or connection. She was just an omega, wolfless and ordinary, and she had accepted that truth long ago. "Here," she said softly, kneeling down beside him and offering the bowl and bread. "It is hot." Be careful." The man stared at the food for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. Then his hands, large and calloused despite their current filthy state, reached out and took the bowl from her with surprising gentleness. "You are kind," he said, his voice rough and deep, like gravel shifting beneath heavy wheels. "Not many people would do this." Nora shrugged, settling back on her heels. "Everyone deserves to eat. Everyone deserves basic dignity." She watched as he brought the bowl to his lips and took a careful sip of the broth. His eyes closed briefly, and something that looked almost like relief passed over his features. "What is your name?" he asked after a moment. "Nora," she replied. "Just Nora." He nodded slowly, chewing a piece of meat with obvious appreciation. "Just Nora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "And you work here, at this tavern?" She nodded. "I cook and clean. It is not much, but it is honest work." She hesitated, then added, "What is your name?" The man was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant as if considering how to answer. Finally, he said, "You can call me Darius." Something about the way he said it made Nora think it might not be his real name, or at least not the whole truth. But she did not press. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had reasons for the paths they walked. "Well, Darius," she said, rising to her feet and brushing the dirt from her skirt. "You can stay here tonight if you need shelter. There is a small shed behind the tavern. It is dry and there are some old blankets. It is not much, but it is better than sleeping in the mud." Darius looked up at her, and this time the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. It was as if he was seeing straight through her, past all the walls she had built, past all the insecurities and pain, directly into the core of who she was. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why are you helping me?" Nora thought about that question. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the years. Why did she continue to show kindness when it only brought her ridicule? Why did she give when she had so little? Why did she care about strangers when her own pack barely acknowledged her existence? "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing," she finally said. "And because I believe that kindness is never wasted, even if it feels that way sometimes." Darius studied her face for another long moment, and then something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, just a slight softening around his eyes, but it made him look less like a desperate vagrant and more like something else entirely. Something powerful, something dangerous. But then he lowered his gaze and nodded. "Thank you, Nora," he said quietly. "I will not forget this." She smiled, a small, genuine smile that she rarely showed to anyone in the pack. "Eat," she said, "and rest. Tomorrow is going to be a big day for everyone." She turned and walked back toward the tavern, unaware that the man watching her leave was not just any beggar, but the most powerful alpha in the entire realm, and that she had just sealed her fate in ways she could never imagine. Inside the tavern, Vivian was waiting, her arms crossed and her expression sour. "I hope you enjoyed your little moment of martyrdom," she sneered. "Because after tomorrow, when I am chosen by the Alpha King, I am going to make sure you understand exactly what happens to Omegas who do not know their place." Nora did not respond. She simply walked past Vivian, returned to the kitchen, and began cleaning up for the night. She had learned long ago that people like Vivian fed on reactions, on fear and anger. The best thing to do was simply continue existing, continue surviving, continue being kind, even when the world seemed determined to punish her for it. That night, as she lay in her small room above the tavern, Nora could not sleep. There was something about the encounter with the beggar that lingered in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the warmth she had felt in her chest, the strange sensation that something significant had just occurred, even though logic told her it was just another act of charity in a long line of similar moments. She rolled over in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the pack settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear wolves howling, calling to the moon that hung fat and silver in the sky. She had always wondered what it would feel like to howl like that, to feel the power of a wolf coursing through her veins, to experience the freedom and strength that everyone else took for granted. But her wolf had never emerged. Some said she did not have one at all. Others whispered that she was cursed, broken, defective. And maybe they were right. Maybe she was simply meant to be ordinary, invisible, forgotten. But even as that thought crossed her mind, something deep inside her stirred. It was faint, barely perceptible, like the flutter of wings in a dark room. For just a moment, she thought she felt something. A presence. A consciousness that was separate from her own. But then it was gone, and she convinced herself it had been nothing more than her imagination playing tricks in the darkness. Tomorrow, the Alpha King would arrive. Tomorrow, Vivian would parade herself like a prize mare before the most powerful wolf in existence. Tomorrow, life would continue exactly as it always had, with Nora on the outside looking in, serving and cleaning and surviving. She closed her eyes and tried to push away the strange restlessness that had taken hold of her heart. Sleep came eventually, but it was fitful and full of dreams she could not quite remember when morning arrived. The tavern was chaos the next day. Everyone in the pack was preparing for the Alpha King's arrival, and the tavern had been chosen as one of the locations where pack members would gather before proceeding to the ceremonial grounds. Nora had been working since before dawn, preparing food and ensuring everything was spotless. Her hands were raw from scrubbing and her back ached from hauling supplies, but she did not complain. This was her role. This was what she did. Around mid-morning, Vivian arrived with an entourage of her friends, all dressed in their finest gowns, their hair elaborately styled, their makeup perfect. They took over the main room of the tavern, laughing and gossiping and speculating about what the Alpha King would be like. "I heard he is incredibly handsome," one of the she-wolves said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They say he is tall and powerful, with eyes that can see into your soul." Vivian examined her reflection in a small hand mirror, adjusting a strand of hair with meticulous precision. "Of course he is handsome," she said dismissively. "But more importantly, he is powerful. Whoever becomes his queen will have influence beyond anything we can imagine. She will be the most important she-wolf in the entire realm." Another she-wolf giggled. "And you think that will be you, Vivian?" Vivian snapped her mirror shut and fixed the other girl with a cold stare. "I know it will be me," she said flatly. "My father is the beta. I have the breeding, the education, the grace. I am the obvious choice." She glanced toward the kitchen where Nora was working, and her lips curved into a cruel smile. "Unlike some people who will spend the ceremony serving drinks and emptying chamber pots." The other she-wolves laughed, and Nora felt her face burn with humiliation. But she kept her head down and continued working. She had learned that the fastest way through pain was simply to endure it. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The ceremonial grounds were located in the center of the pack territory, a large clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees that had witnessed countless rituals over the generations. By the time Nora finished her work at the tavern and made her way to the grounds, the area was already packed with pack members, all dressed in their best clothes, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the Alpha King's arrival. Nora stayed at the back of the crowd, as far from the center as possible. She was not here to be seen or noticed. She was here because attendance was mandatory for all pack members, regardless of rank. She found a spot beneath one of the oak trees and leaned against the rough bark, watching as the pack's leadership took their positions on the raised platform at the center of the clearing. Alpha Marcus, the leader of the Crescent Moon Pack, stood tall and proud in his ceremonial robes. Beside him was Beta James, Vivian's father, his expression stern and calculating. And there, at the front of the platform, was Vivian herself, positioned perfectly to be the first she-wolf the Alpha King would see when he arrived. A hush fell over the crowd, as the sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest. Nora's heart began to beat faster, though she could not explain why. She had no reason to be nervous. She had no reason to feel anything at all. This moment had nothing to do with her. The Alpha King would arrive. He would conduct whatever business had brought him here. He would perhaps choose some she-wolves to consider for his queen, and then he would leave. Life would return to normal. Her life would remain exactly as it was. But, as the horses emerged from the tree line, something inside Nora shifted. The air itself seemed to change, to thicken, to hum with a power that made every hair on her body stand on end. At the head of the procession rode a man unlike any Nora had ever seen. He was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence that seemed to fill the entire clearing. His dark hair was swept back from a face that was both beautiful and terrifying in its intensity. He wore black armor that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and a crimson cloak that flowed behind him like blood. But it was his eyes that captured Nora's attention and refused to let go. Even from this distance, she could see them. Golden amber eyes that glowed with an inner fire. The same eyes that had looked at her last night from beneath layers of dirt and exhaustion. The same eyes that had studied her face with such intensity when she had offered him food and shelter. The beggar. The beggar she had fed. The beggar she had shown kindness to. That was no beggar. That was the Alpha King. Nora's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was seeing, trying to reconcile the broken man from last night with the godlike figure now dismounting from his horse with fluid grace. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. But as Darius Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Realm, stepped onto the platform and his gaze swept over the assembled pack members, his eyes stopped moving when they found her. Even across the distance, even through the hundreds of people between them, Nora felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. The world seemed to narrow to just that moment, just that connection. Everything else faded away. The whispers of the crowd, the rustling of leaves, the beating of her own heart. All of it disappeared, leaving only those golden eyes looking at her, as if she was the only person in existence. Alpha Marcus stepped forward, his voice booming across the clearing. Alpha King Darius, it is our greatest honor to welcome you to the Crescent Moon Pack. We have prepared everything for your visit, and we hope to exceed your every expectation. Darius did not look at Alpha Marcus. He did not acknowledge the greeting. His eyes remained locked on Nora, and slowly, deliberately, he began to walk. Not toward the center of the platform where Vivian stood with her practiced smile. Not toward the pack's leadership who waited to greet him formally. He walked toward the edge of the platform, toward the crowd, toward the back where Nora stood frozen beneath the oak tree. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Whispers erupted, confused and shocked. This was not how the ceremony was supposed to proceed. The Alpha King was supposed to receive formal greetings, inspect the pack's warriors, review the eligible she-wolves who had been prepared for presentation. He was not supposed to walk into the crowd. He was not supposed to ignore protocol. And he was certainly not supposed to be walking directly toward the least important member of the pack, the wolfless Omega who spent her days scrubbing floors and feeding beggars. Nora wanted to run. Every instinct she had screamed at her to turn and flee into the forest, to hide, to disappear. But her body would not obey. She stood paralyzed, watching as the most powerful alpha in existence approached her with single-minded determination. When he finally reached her, standing, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, Darius spoke in a voice that was meant only for her. though the supernatural silence that had fallen over the clearing meant that everyone heard his words. "You offered me food when I was hungry," he said quietly. "You offered me shelter when I was cold. You showed me kindness when you had every reason to turn me away." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to, and gently took her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, Nora gasped. A shock of electricity raced up her arm and exploded in her chest, spreading through her entire body in waves of heat and light. And for the first time in her life, she felt it. The presence she had always been told did not exist. The consciousness that had been sleeping inside her. Her wolf. It stirred, stretching as if waking from a long slumber. And when it opened its eyes, Nora saw the world through a different lens. She saw the golden thread connecting her to Darius, saw the mate bond that had snapped into place the moment she had shown him compassion, saw the truth that had been hidden from her entire life. She was not broken. She was not defective. Her wolf had been waiting for him. "You are my mate," Darius said, his voice carrying across the silent clearing like thunder. "You are my destined queen." The shock that rippled through the crowd was palpable. Nora heard someone gasp, heard Vivian's sharp intake of breath, heard Alpha, Marcus stammering something that might have been a protest or a question. But all of that faded into background noise as Nora stared up at Darius, at the Alpha King who had disguised himself as a beggar to find the truth about his people, and who had found something far more valuable than political intelligence. "I do not understand," Nora whispered. "I am nobody. I am just an Omega. I do not even have a wolf." Darius smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Gone was the stern, intimidating king. In his place was a man who looked at her as if she was the most precious thing in existence. "You have a wolf," he said gently. "She was simply waiting for the right moment to emerge. And as for being nobody, Nora, you are everything." He turned to face the crowd, still holding her hand, and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "I came to your pack in disguise because I wanted to see the truth of who my people are when they do not know they are being watched. I wanted to see their character, their compassion, their worth." He paused, his grip on Nora's hand tightening slightly. "Most of you failed that test. You saw a person in need and you turned away with disgust. You saw suffering and you responded with cruelty. You judged worth by appearance and status, rather than by the content of character." His golden eyes swept across the crowd, and many pack members had the grace to look ashamed. "But this woman," he continued, gesturing to Nora, "this woman who you have dismissed and degraded, who you have treated as less than. She saw a stranger in need and responded with kindness. She gave her own food to someone she believed had nothing. She offered shelter without expecting anything in return. She showed me the best of what it means to be a wolf, even though you all told her she did not have one." He turned back to Nora, and his expression softened. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes. The mate bond chose you for a reason, and I believe that reason is because you have the kind of heart that a true queen needs. Not a heart that seeks power or status, but a heart that leads with compassion and strength. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below." Nora's mind was reeling. This could not be happening. Things like this did not happen to people like her. She was supposed to be invisible, forgotten, insignificant. She was not supposed to be standing in front of the entire pack, hand in hand with the Alpha King, being declared his mate and future queen. "I cannot," she heard herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I do not know how to be a queen. I do not know anything about politics or leadership or any of the things that would be required. I will fail you. I will embarrass you." Darius's smile widened. "You will not fail me," he said with absolute certainty. because you have something that cannot be taught. You have integrity. You have compassion. You have the courage to be kind in a world that punishes kindness. Everything else can be learned. He raised their joined hands, and Nora saw the way the light caught on their skin, saw the way the mate bond glowed between them like golden fire. But the choice is yours, Darius said, his voice dropping lower, meant only for her ears despite the attentive crowd. I am offering you this, offering you everything that I am and everything that I have, but I will not force you. The mate bond is sacred, but it requires acceptance from both sides. If you do not want this, if you do not want me, I will respect that decision. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. She looked past Darius to where Vivian stood on the platform, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. She thought about all the years of mockery, all the times she had been told she was worthless, all the moments she had felt invisible and forgotten. And then she looked back at Darius, at the man who had seen her, truly seen her, when he had every reason to look away. The man who had recognized the worth in her simple act of kindness. The man whose eyes held a promise of something she had never dared to hope for. Acceptance. Value. Love. I do not know how to be a queen, she said again. But this time her voice was stronger. But I know how to be kind. I know how to work hard. I know how to care for others. She took a deep breath, feeling her wolf surge within her, lending her courage. If you believe I can learn the rest, then I will try. I will accept this. I will accept you. The smile that spread across Darius's face was brilliant, and before Nora could process what was happening, he had pulled her into his arms and lifted her off the ground, spinning her once before setting her back down with careful gentleness. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some people were cheering, genuinely happy for the unexpected romance unfolding before them. Others were whispering furiously, scandalized by the breach of protocol in the Kao. Shocking choice of the Alpha King. And still others, like Vivienne and her father, looked murderous. But Nora barely noticed any of it. All she could focus on was Darius, on the way he looked at her as if she was a miracle, on the way her wolf hummed with contentment in his presence, on the way her entire world had shifted on its axis in the span of a single day. Alpha Marcus finally recovered enough to approach them, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious shock in his eyes. Alpha. King Darius, he said carefully, this is most unexpected. We had prepared several she-wolves for your consideration, she-wolves of good breeding and excellent education. Darius turned to face the Alpha, and his expression shifted from warm to coldly authoritative in an instant. And yet none of them passed the test that mattered most, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. I do not need a queen with good breeding or excellent education. I need a queen with a good heart, an excellent character. And I have found her. Alpha Marcus's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head in acknowledgement. He was not foolish enough to argue with the Alpha King, especially not in front of the entire pack. Of course, Alpha King, he said stiffly. We will support your choice in every way possible. Darius's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could sense the insincerity in those words, but he simply nodded. See that you do, he said. Then he turned to Nora and his expression softened. Again, we need to talk, he said quietly. There is much I need to explain, much you need to understand about what this means. But first, I want you to meet my beta and the warriors who traveled with me. They are good people. They will help you adjust to everything that is about to change. Nora nodded, still feeling as if she was moving through a dream. Darius kept her hand clasped in his as he led her back toward the platform, and she was acutely aware of every eye following their progress. Some looked curious, some looked envious, some looked hostile. But with Darius beside her, with her wolf finally awake and lending her strength, Nora found that she could face those stares without flinching. The beta who stepped forward to greet her was a mountain of a man, tall and broad with kind eyes and a warm smile. "My name is Marcus," he said, and then laughed at Nora's confused expression. "Yes, same name as your alpha. It is a common source of confusion. I am Beta Marcus Steele, at your service, future queen." He bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that made Nora's cheeks burn. Nobody had ever bowed to her before. Nobody had ever looked at her with anything approaching deference. "Please," she said quickly, "you do not need to bow. I am just Nora." Beta Marcus straightened and exchanged a glance with Darius. "You will find, Nora, that you are no longer just anything," he said gently. "You are the Alpha King's mate. You are the future queen of the realm. And that means that, yes, people will bow. It will take some getting used to, but you will adapt." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist that this was all too much too fast. But before she could speak, a commotion at the edge of the crowd caught everyone's attention. Vivienne was pushing through the gathered pack members, her face flushed with anger, her carefully styled hair beginning to come loose from its pins. "This is ridiculous," she announced loudly as she reached the platform. "You cannot seriously expect anyone to accept this. She is an Omega. She is wolfless. She has no education, no refinement, no breeding. She is completely unsuitable to be a queen." Darius's expression went cold, and the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop several degrees. "You will watch your tone," he said quietly, but his voice carried a threat that made several people step back. "You are speaking about my mate. You are speaking about your future queen." Vivienne's eyes flashed with defiance. "I am speaking the truth that everyone else is too afraid to say. You made a mistake. You were deceived by a momentary act of charity. But charity does not make someone qualified to lead." Darius took a step toward Vivienne, and the sheer power radiating from him made Nora's wolf whimper in her mind. This was not the gentle man who had smiled at her and spun her in his arms. This was the Alpha King, the most dominant wolf in existence, and he was not pleased. "You want to talk about qualifications?" Darius said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated through the air. "Let us discuss qualifications. When I approached your pack as a beggar, you laughed at me. You mocked me. You told Nora she was wasting food on trash. That is what you did when you thought I had no power. When you thought there would be no consequences for cruelty." He paused, letting his words sink in. A true queen does not show kindness only when it benefits her. A true queen does not judge worth by appearance or status. A true queen leads with compassion and integrity, regardless of who is watching. You failed that test spectacularly, Vivienne, and you will show respect to Nora, or you will find yourself banished from Packlands. The silence that followed was absolute. Vivienne's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Beta James stepped forward quickly, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Forgive her, Alpha King," he said, his voice strained. "She is young and spoke out of turn. It will not happen again." Darius held Vivienne's gaze for another long moment, then turned away dismissively. "See that it does not," he said. He looked down at Nora, and his expression softened once more. "Come," he said gently. "Let us go somewhere we can talk privately." Nora nodded, grateful to escape the weight of all those staring eyes. Darius led her away from the ceremonial grounds, through the forest, to a quiet clearing beside a stream. The sound of running water was soothing, and for the first time since the Alpha King had revealed himself, Nora felt like she could breathe. Darius released her hand and moved to sit on a large, flat rock beside the stream. He patted the space next to him in invitation, and after a moment's hesitation, Nora sat down, leaving a careful distance between them. "You can ask me anything," Darius said quietly, watching the water flow past. "I know you must have 1,000 questions." Nora did have questions. Too many to count. but the one that rose to the surface first was simple and direct. "Why?" she asked. "Why disguise yourself? Why test us like that?" Darius was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because I needed to know the truth," he finally said. "For years, I have had wolves seeking my favor, seeking power and position. Everyone I meet has an agenda. Everyone wants something from me. I never know if the respect I receive is genuine or simply a mask worn to gain advantage." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hand. "I wanted to find my mate the right way. Not through political arrangement or strategic alliance, but through genuine connection. The moon goddess grants the mate bond for a reason. It is meant to unite souls that complement each other, that make each other stronger. But how could I trust that bond if I never knew what my mate was truly like beneath the performance?" He tossed the stone into the stream and watched the ripples spread outward. "So I traveled in disguise, visiting different packs, observing, learning. And in every place I saw the same thing: cruelty toward those with less power, indifference toward suffering, selfishness masquerading as strength. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on." Nora thought about that, about how discouraging it must have been to see the worst of people over and over again. "And then you came here," she said softly. "And you met me." Darius turned to look at her, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. "And then I met you," he agreed. "And you showed me something I had almost stopped believing existed. You showed me genuine kindness. Not kindness for show, not kindness to gain favor, but kindness simply because it was the right thing to do. You gave me your own meal. You offered me shelter. You saw a person in need and you helped, even though it cost you something, even though it brought you ridicule." He reached out and took her hand again, and Nora felt that same electric connection, that same sense of rightness. "The moment you handed me that bowl of stew, I felt it. The mate bond. It clicked into place like a lock finding its key, and I knew that the moon goddess had led me to you for a reason." Nora's eyes filled with tears. She had spent so many years believing she was broken, believing she was less than everyone else. And now this man, this powerful, incredible man, was telling her that she was exactly who he had been searching for. "I am still afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am afraid I will not be good enough. I am afraid I will disappoint you." Darius lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You could never disappoint me," he said firmly. "You are my mate. You are already perfect exactly as you are. Everything else, all the skills and knowledge you think you lack, those can be learned. My mother will help you. My beta will help you. I will help you. You will not be alone in this." Nora wiped at her eyes with her free hand, trying to compose herself. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do I have to leave immediately? Do I have to say goodbye to everything I have ever known?" Darius shook his head. "We will stay here for a few days," he said. "You will have time to prepare, time to say proper goodbyes. And then, when you are ready, we will travel to the royal court together. I will not rush you. This is a significant transition, and I want you to feel as comfortable as possible." Relief flooded through Nora. A few days was not much time, but it was better than being whisked away immediately. She would have time to process everything, time to let the reality of her new situation sink in. "There is something else you should know," Darius said, his expression growing serious. "Your wolf. She is not ordinary, Nora." Nora blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Darius squeezed her hand gently. "I can sense power in you. Significant power. Your wolf did not emerge because she was not strong enough. She stayed dormant because she was too strong. She was waiting for the right trigger, the right moment, to awaken safely." He paused, watching her face carefully. "I believe you may carry ancient bloodlines, possibly even royal bloodlines. The power I sense in you is similar to what I feel in myself, what I feel in other wolves of noble ancestry." Nora shook her head in disbelief. "That is impossible. I am an Omega. My parents were Omegas. There is nothing special about my bloodline." Darius smiled slightly. "Your parents may have been Omegas, but that does not mean their bloodlines were ordinary. Sometimes powerful genetics skip generations. Sometimes they are suppressed by circumstances or environment. But they are still there, waiting." He stood up and pulled her to her feet, keeping her hands clasped in his. "When we return to the royal court, we will have the pack historians research your lineage. But regardless of what they find, it does not change anything. You are my mate. You are my queen. That is all that matters." Nora looked up at him, at this man who had turned her entire world upside down in the span of a day, and felt her wolf surge within her in agreement. "Yes," her wolf seemed to say. "Yes, this is right. This is where we are meant to be." "Can I feel her?" Nora asked suddenly. "My wolf, can I feel her properly? Can I shift?" Darius's eyes lit up with excitement. "Would you like to try?" Nora nodded eagerly. For years she had watched other wolves shift, had felt the pang of longing and loss every time someone transformed. To finally have the chance to experience it herself was overwhelming. "Close your eyes," Darius instructed gently. "Breathe deeply, and reach inward. Your wolf is there. She has always been there. You just need to acknowledge her, welcome her, let her know it is safe to emerge." Nora did as he said, closing her eyes and focusing on her breathing. At first, she felt nothing different. But then, slowly, she became aware of that presence in her mind, that consciousness that had stirred when Darius touched her. It felt warm and powerful, like molten silver flowing through her veins. "Hello," Nora whispered internally, feeling slightly foolish. "I know you are there. I am sorry it took me so long to acknowledge you." The presence stirred, stretched, and suddenly Nora felt it fully. Her wolf. Not a separate entity exactly, but an integral part of herself that had been sleeping. And with that recognition came power. Raw, untamed power that flooded through her body like lightning. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with silver light. Darius stepped back, giving her space, his expression a mix of awe and pride. "Let her out," he encouraged. "Let her show you what you have been missing." Nora took a shaky breath and released the control she had been maintaining her entire life. She let the power flow, let her wolf take form, and felt her body beginning to shift. Tagr. Transformation was painful but exhilarating. Her bones restructured, her muscles reformed, fur erupted across her skin in a wave of shimmering silver. And when it was complete, when she stood on 4 legs instead of 2, Nora threw her head back and howled. The sound echoed through the forest, primal and joyous, announcing her arrival to the world. She was not broken. She was not defective. She was a wolf, powerful and whole and perfect. Darius shifted beside her, his own transformation swift and practiced. His wolf was massive, black as midnight with those same golden amber eyes. He was easily twice Nora's size, radiating dominance and power. But when he looked at her, when he moved close and pressed his muzzle against hers, there was only gentleness. They ran together through the forest, Darius letting Nora set the pace, letting her experience the joy of movement and freedom that she had been denied for so long. They chased each other through the trees, played in a meadow filled with wildflowers, and finally collapsed beside the stream, panting and happy. When they shifted back to their human forms, both of them were breathless and smiling. Darius pulled Nora into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for finding me." Darius pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for showing me that genuine goodness still exists in this world," he replied. "Thank you for reminding me what really matters." They stayed there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the sun slowly set and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. When they finally returned to the pack grounds, everything had changed. People who had ignored Nora her entire life now bowed as she passed. People who had mocked her now looked at her with fear and respect. And Vivian, standing beside her father, looked at her with undisguised hatred. But Nora found that she did not care. She had spent too many years caring what people like Vivian thought. She had wasted too much energy trying to make herself small and invisible to avoid their cruelty. No more. She was the Alpha King's mate. She was the future queen. And more importantly, she knew her worth. Not because of her new position, but because she had always had value. She had always been worthy. She had just needed someone to recognize it. The next few days passed in a blur. Darius insisted that Nora stay with him at the guest house that had been prepared for the Alpha King, rather than returning to her small room above the tavern. He also assigned 2 of his warriors to guard her at all times, explaining that as his mate, she was now a valuable target for anyone who might wish to harm the king or destabilize the realm. Nora found the constant attention overwhelming at first, but she gradually adjusted. The warriors, a female named Sarah and a male named Thomas, were friendly and patient, answering her endless questions about life at the royal court and what would be expected of her as queen. "The most important thing," Sarah explained as they sat in the garden of the guest house, "is to be yourself. The king chose you for who you are, not for who you might become. Yes, there will be etiquette to learn and protocols to memorize, but at your core, you need to remain the person who showed kindness to a stranger. That is what the realm needs in a queen." Thomas nodded in agreement. "And do not worry about making mistakes," he added. "Everyone makes mistakes when they first arrive at court. The key is to learn from them and move forward. The king will protect you from anyone who tries to use your inexperience against you." Their words were reassuring, but Nora still felt anxiety coiling in her stomach whenever she thought about the future. She was leaving behind everything familiar, stepping into a world she did not understand, taking on responsibilities she had never been trained for. But whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she would feel Darius's presence through the mate bond, a steady warmth that reminded her she was not alone. On the 3rd evening of their stay, Darius took Nora to a private dinner he had arranged in the forest clearing where they had first run together as wolves. The area had been transformed with softly glowing lanterns hanging from the trees, and a table set with fine china and crystal glasses. It was beautiful and intimate and completely unexpected. "I wanted to give you a proper courtship," Darius explained as he pulled out her chair. "In all the chaos and ceremony, I realized we have not had much time to simply be together, to talk and learn about each other without the pressure of politics or duty." Nora smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I would like that," she said softly. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, learning about each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Darius told her about the weight of being Alpha King, about the constant decisions that affected thousands of lives, about the loneliness of leadership. Nora told him about her childhood, about losing her parents when she was young, about the years of working at the tavern and trying to find purpose in a world that seemed determined to tell her she had none. "I used to wonder why the moon goddess made me different," Nora admitted as they finished their meal. "Why she gave everyone else wolves but left me empty. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, or maybe I was being punished for something." Darius reached across the table and took her hand. "The moon goddess does not punish," he said gently. "She guides. She knew you needed to develop strength of character before your wolf emerged. She knew that if your power had awakened too early, before you had learned compassion and humility, you might have become someone different, someone harder, someone less capable of being the queen this realm needs. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Everything you went through, all the pain and rejection and struggle, it shaped you into exactly who you are. And who you are is perfect. Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. She had never imagined that someone could look at her past, at all her perceived failures and weaknesses, and see them as strengths. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few days, but I feel it. The mate bond, yes, but also just you. Who you are, how you see the world, how you see me. I love you." Darius's smile was radiant. "I love you too," he said. "From the moment you handed me that bowl of stew with such gentle care, I loved you. Every moment since has only made that love grow stronger." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, if she wanted to, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and reverent and filled with promise. Nora melted into it, into him, feeling the mate bond flare between them like wildfire. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "When we return to the royal court," he said quietly, "we will have a formal mating ceremony. But I want you to know that in my heart, you are already my mate. You are already my queen. You are already everything I need." Nora nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She had gone from being invisible to being cherished in the span of a few days, and the whiplash of it was almost too much to process. But as she sat there in the glowing lantern light, held in the arms of the man who had chosen her, who had seen her worth when no one else could, Nora finally allowed herself to believe it. She was not broken. She was not less than. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The next morning dawned bright and clear. The perfect day for their departure. Nora had said her goodbyes to the few people in the pack who had shown her genuine kindness over the years. She had packed her few belongings, feeling slightly ridiculous that everything she owned fit into a single small bag. Darius had assured her that she would have everything she needed at the royal court, that seamstresses and attendants were already preparing quarters for her arrival. But still, leaving behind the only home she had ever known, even a home that had brought her more pain than joy, was difficult. The pack assembled to watch them leave, a much different atmosphere than when they had arrived. Now everyone knew who Nora was, what she meant to the Alpha King. Some people looked genuinely happy for her. Others looked envious or resentful. But all of them bowed when she passed, acknowledging her new status whether they liked it or not. Vivian was notably absent. According to Sarah, who had been keeping an ear to the ground for potential threats, Vivian had been confined to her family's home by her father after making several inappropriate comments about the situation. It was probably for the best. Nora did not want her last memory of the pack to include another confrontation with the she-wolf who had made so much of her life miserable. As Nora mounted the horse that had been prepared for her, she caught sight of the tavern in the distance. She thought about all the hours she had spent there, cooking and cleaning and serving. Part of her felt guilty for leaving, as if she was abandoning her responsibilities. But then Darius rode up beside her, magnificent on his black stallion, and smiled at her with such warmth that all her doubts faded away. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Nora looked at the tavern one last time, then turned her gaze forward, toward the road that would lead them to the royal court, to her new life, to her future. "Yes," she said firmly. "I am ready." The journey took 5 days, traveling through territories Nora had never seen, passing through forests and meadows and small villages where people came out to stare in awe as the Alpha King's procession passed by. Word of Nora's identity had spread quickly, and everywhere they stopped, people were curious about the wolfless Omega who had captured their king's heart. but Darius was fiercely protective, keeping Nora close and ensuring she was never overwhelmed by the attention. Each night they camped beneath the stars, and Darius would hold her close, telling her stories about the royal court and the people she would meet there. He described his mother, the former queen, who he promised would love Nora immediately. He talked about the palace, a sprawling structure of white stone and crystal that had housed the royal family for generations. He painted a picture of her future that was both exciting and terrifying in equal measure. On the 5th evening, as the sun began to set, they crested a hill, and Nora saw it for the first time. The royal city. It spread out before them like something from a dream. Thousands of buildings arranged in careful circles around the central palace that gleamed white and gold in the fading light. It was larger than anything Nora had imagined, more beautiful and imposing and overwhelming. "That is home," Darius said softly, watching her reaction. "Our home." Nora took a shaky breath. "It is magnificent," she whispered, "and terrifying." Darius reached over and squeezed her hand. "You will be magnificent there too," he said with certainty. "Give yourself time. Give yourself grace. And remember that you have already proven yourself in the ways that truly matter." They descended the hill as darkness fell, and as they approached the city gates, Nora saw that crowds had gathered. Thousands of people lined the streets, all wanting to catch a glimpse of their king and his new mate. The noise was deafening, a roar of voices calling out greetings and blessings. Nora's horse shied slightly at the commotion, but Darius was there immediately, steadying both the animal and Nora with his calm presence. "Wave," he instructed gently. "Let them see you. Let them see their future queen." Nora lifted a trembling hand and waved at the crowd. The roar grew even louder, and she saw people smiling, saw children being lifted onto their parents' shoulders to get a better view, saw genuine happiness in the faces of these strangers, who already seemed to accept her. They rode through the city to the palace gates, where more guards stood at attention. The gates swung open as they approached, revealing a massive courtyard filled with people. Palace staff, warriors, nobles, all assembled to welcome their king home. And standing at the top of the palace steps was a woman who could only be Darius's mother. She was tall and regal, with silver hair and the same golden amber eyes as her son. But her expression as she watched Nora dismount was not cold or judgmental. It was warm, welcoming. The former queen descended the steps with graceful speed and approached Nora directly. "So you are the one who finally captured my son's heart," she said, her voice rich and kind. "I am Morgana Blackthorn, and I am very pleased to meet you, Nora." Nora started to curtsy, her mind scrambling to remember the formal protocols Sarah had tried to teach her. But Morgana stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "None of that," she said firmly. "You are family now. And in this family, we embrace." She pulled Nora into a hug that was tight and genuine, and Nora felt something inside her crack. She had not had a mother's embrace in so many years. She had forgotten how it felt to be held with unconditional acceptance. When Morgana finally released her, there were tears in both their eyes. "Come," Morgana said, linking her arm through Nora's. "Let us get you settled. I am sure you are exhausted from the journey. We can handle all the formal introductions tomorrow. Tonight you rest." Darius caught Nora's eye as his mother began leading her toward the palace, and the look he gave her was so full of love and pride that Nora felt her heart swell. This was her life now. This magnificent palace, these accepting people, this powerful man who looked at her like she hung the moon in the sky. It was overwhelming and impossible and absolutely terrifying. But as Nora walked through the palace doors, feeling the warmth of Morgana's acceptance and the solid presence of Darius, behind her, she realized something important. She was ready. Not because she had all the answers or knew all the protocols, not because she was suddenly confident and fearless, but because she had what truly mattered. She had integrity. She had compassion. She had love. Everything else could be learned. The formal mating ceremony took place 2 weeks later, giving Nora time to adjust to palace life and begin her training as queen. Those 2 weeks were intense, filled with lessons on etiquette, politics, history, and protocol. But true to his word, Darius ensured she was never overwhelmed, always there to support her, always reminding her that she was doing beautifully. Morgana became not just a teacher, but a friend, patient and kind, as she helped Nora navigate the complex world of royal politics. And slowly, Nora began to find her footing. The ceremony itself was magnificent, held in the great hall before thousands of witnesses. Nora wore a gown of silver and white that seemed to shimmer with its own light, and her hair was adorned with a crown of moonflowers. When she walked down the aisle toward where Darius waited, looking impossibly handsome in his ceremonial armor, she saw his eyes fill with wonder. The mating ritual was ancient and sacred, involving oaths spoken in the old language and the formal claiming bite that would mark her as his before the entire realm. When Darius's teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder, Nora felt the mate bond solidify into something unbreakable, permanent, eternal. And when she returned the bite, marking him as hers in return, the power that surged between them made the air itself crackle with energy. The crowd erupted in cheers as they turned to face their people, officially mated, officially king and queen. Nora looked out at the sea of faces, at the realm she would now help lead, and felt her wolf surge with pride and determination. She had started as an invisible omega, dismissed and degraded. But she had ended as a queen, not because of political maneuvering or strategic alliance, but because she had shown kindness to a stranger, because she had stayed true to herself even when the world told her she was worthless, because the moon goddess had known exactly what she was doing when she made Nora wait, made her struggle, made her develop the strength of character that true leadership required. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments. Did you see this ending coming? That night, after the ceremony and the feast, and the endless congratulations, Darius finally led Nora to their private chambers. He closed the door behind them, shutting out the rest of the world, and pulled her into his arms. "My queen," he murmured against her hair. "My mate. My love." Nora smiled, wrapping her arms around his waist and breathing in his scent. "My king," she replied. "My mate. My everything." They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, feeling the mate bond hum between them with contentment and joy. Outside, the city celebrated their union. Inside, two souls who had found each other against all odds finally allowed themselves to rest in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. Nora's journey from invisible Omega to powerful queen was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, political intrigues to navigate, enemies to face, but none of that mattered in this moment. In this moment, she was simply Nora, loved, valued, and finally home. And as Darius led her toward their bed, his eyes dark with promise and devotion, Nora sent a silent thank you to the moon goddess who had guided her path, who had made her wait, made her suffer, but ultimately led her to exactly where she was meant to be, with the man who had seen past her circumstances to the treasure beneath, with the man who had taught her that kindness was never wasted, with the man who had shown her that sometimes offering food to a beggar could change the entire course of your life, because that beggar might just be an alpha king in disguise, and that simple act of compassion might just be the beginning of the greatest love story ever told.